will start with our group. So, number one, and again, so how to safeguard and transmit living heritage. And we had a quite intensive and interesting discussion. And we are trying to understand what is cultural heritage, what each of us feel it is. Then a few examples of how to transmit and receive cultural heritage, and also how to safeguard it. And I don't know if we were that good in the questions we wanted to answer, but we kind of, in our table there was one question I think raised all the time. First of all, what is our heritage? We feel that all the time, especially in our table, I don't know if it was just a happening, that living in these globalization times, and almost each of us in here feels in our table that we have so many heritages and so many culture backgrounds that to kind of choose one or to put ourselves in some box has been quite difficult. So it kind of difficults all our discussion about the living heritage. And also one thing that I thought it was quite interesting, that should we always transmit all the heritages, or should we choose what to transmit? Because maybe there are some heritage that they're not good. So we kind of want to also choose different values from different heritage that we try to transmit. And everyone is saying yes, so yes, okay, I'm doing okay. And of course, we talked quite much about language. What is the importance of preserving language? Also language as a very big part of cultural heritage. And yeah, well, we can do it in so many ways. We can talk, we can have conversations, how we do it to our own children, or how we are getting the culture heritage from our own ancestors and so on. So in yeah.
We can cook.
And we can cook. But then what we decided to do, to give one example, we were doing this spinning top. Can someone show how does it work?
Yes. It's lovely, look like.
Oh.
So this is also one idea that in our group
Yeah.
we wanted to transmit. So this is the way that Rosa Maria does it in Peru, Mexico. Now I'm looking at Roxana. But then of course each of our cultures have their own spinning top. So once more we came to the conclusion that all the time we have been influenced by other cultures. Rosa Maria started in the beginning to talk about her techniques using in cartoneria, which first has come from China, then to Italy by Marco Polo, and then to Spain, and then from Spain to Mexico. So, and now to Finland. So in that sense, that the cultural heritage is all the time changing and coming to different places. So we thought this is one of the ways also how to transmit it, because now each of us, at least in our table, we can also repeat it. We can also now give it to other people. And well, it was fun also to do it. Anything else you want to add to our conversation?
Identity? Did you say this word, magic word?
I didn't say the magic word of identity, but I felt that all of us are kind of searching for it, because we are in so many different boxes at the same time.
But this is a very... I think it's very ajankohtaista in English. Actual, yeah. Because, like you said, we kind of put in boxes, but we don't want to be put in boxes, but then we have to go through questions, identity questions, and I've been to many seminars about language, Russian language in Finland, and education of blah 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 Russian people, and how to preserve, and many people like mentioning identities, but then skipping it over, because it's such a question that I don't know, I have really to start the project of how to build an identity, how to deal with it, and how to guide our children so that they weren't, although it is a very personal process and each has to go through it by itself, but then maybe how to help and to guide them so there won't be a conflict. Like you mentioned, very interesting thing, that if there is a conflict inside, then the person is very uncomfortable in the society. But then if he has deal with it and he has built his identity, then it's easy to communicate with him, isn't it so? So this question is why I'm here. That's why I want this word to be used. Thank you.
There is participation.
Anything else? And then there is questions.
Yeah.
Jimmy.
No, because I saw this one, and I can tell you it in my country also. You know what it is for? For what? You know that?
No, what is
No. It's mean for when the husband go home too late, and the wife usually cut his beard, everything.
really?
Yeah.
No.
Wow. So now
That
you
is,
know you have a new way
It's
of.
for the children. They are fighting on playing to cutting their. For example, they playing game because we don't have a choice when we're in long time ago, and the children they take the can or everything. They make like that, like we can say that Vovo is name, and that to fight that who have the best one to cut another like sting that away. And this is for that, not only for this. You know, there's more
Now we
action.
know we made a
Yeah.
weapon.
Yeah. It's also for competition. Who have the best one? And to that is.
Okay, group number 2, Lena.
And Hamza. I'll start from the easier end and leave the more difficult one for you. We had a very nice discussion and an interesting mix of nationalities in our group from Finland, UK, Iran, Turkey, what else? Yes, it was quite interesting. We all discussed about what is important living heritage for us. And for example, many talk about festivities. I mentioned the really nice example of Durga Puja. And what crying women, both in Turkey and Finland, itkiä naiset. Vappu, May Day, Workers' Day, important celebration both in Finland and in the UK, and I bet in many other countries as well. Then there was this one example of a lady who has been living 20 years abroad, was it? Around, and I asked that what are the traditions that you want to take from Finland with you, or you have been taking when you go abroad and you want to transmit to your children, and she mentioned the Advent traditions, for example, pikkujoulu, or Venetian festival, venetsialaiset, which is a coastal tradition at this time of the year, setting out the lights in cottages and so on. Well, food and drinks. Food is important. We talked about tea drinking culture and also drinking culture in pubs. That is something typically English. Iraqi dolma, the Berber traditional plate, Turkish coffee making, Alepponian gastronomic traditions. We also mentioned Turkish kebab. I think it's quite a nice tradition, such as Italian pizza or American hamburgers. We love it. It's all over. In every tiny town in Finland there is a place where you can get all those three, and even blueberry pie. Crafts, we also spoke about Turkish genie tile making. What is that one? About jewelry, Berber jewelry, and an Iraqi scarf, a special scarf made there. Iraqi music, Berber proverbs, love of nature, even Finlandia hymn was mentioned as something special. I don't know if we got so many things that people were like, I so want to take this to the wiki inventory, but just maybe to spread the news that it's there, and we would really like to see the diversity better to be visible there. So if you have someone who is, I already had a nice conversation related to the Inkeri traditions in Finland, so there is one example, maybe Durga Puja or Somali wedding that we have discussed before, or any other good ideas that. So please forward them to the web page, and also to contact me. We are there to help. But Hamza, please do continue.
Thank you, Lena. I have just very short remarks to add to this discussion. Probably it's not just connected to our group, but probably that concerns all the workshops. The first thing I would like just to evoke this point of and this was said as a remark. The living heritage contributes to the integration. Some different immigrants, they don't speak Finnish language, but maybe your cultural living heritage could contribute also to the integration, and contributes also to your living in Finland when you show your culture, and especially when you share it with the host culture or with Finns. That's what we mean. And so make your culture visible, because it's also a part of integration, and this is also a very important point. Sometimes we experience and we know the meaning of our own culture when we move abroad. When we are in our homeland, sometimes we don't feel that we have also interesting cultures. And this is also an important point, that different communities, when they came to Finland, then they started also to think to their own heritage, cultural heritage. This is also important to say, and this is also a part of integration. Sorry, because my head is still going around about the integration matters. I have very shortly the third point. This remark actually was made before the workshops about the cultural appropriation that was evoked before by Marianne. I think she is not here. The cultural appropriation could be an obstacle to spread the traditions, especially here in Finland, and of course, speaking about traditions, speaking also about the cultural heritage. So the cultural appropriation leads to what we call the third culture. When we came as immigrants, we bring with us our own culture, and when we arrive, we find the second culture or the host culture, and by living through years or through months, or I don't know, we will acquire what we call the third culture that gathers the original and the host culture. So I would like to say that the cultural heritage also could be a part of the third culture that we should share also with the Finns, not just we show our traditions and we make festivities, we dance, then we go. But the most important thing is how to share it also with the people of the host culture. And thank you.
Yeah.
Somebody will go with the speech, and I will hold the paper.
Oli Chuber. Mitä?
We had a very nice discussion, and although we started with some questions, but with discussions more questions came, and we discussed about that. First of all, we all agreed that passing the heritage to next generation is important as well as difficult. Because we, the first generation migrant, we have seen these traditions from our childhood, and it seeped into us, we absorb it very naturally. But how to show up this to our second generation, and how to make it interesting to them, that is the challenge. And we all think that in that case, some institution like schools or libraries can take part and take initiatives, and they can arrange some after-school activities to promote their own culture. And another thing came up during the discussion, that family also have a tradition, and now kids may be not interested, but after 30 years they may be interested. So it is not only keeping the heritage orally, maybe it is the era of digitalization, and maybe some documentation is good when the kid, after 30 years some kid is interested, they can find what was it. That is one thing we think that is important. And as I said, that institutional support is important. We are all agreed. And in diaspora, culture deviate from original culture, and it mixed, and it is not a stagnant. Culture is never a stagnant things, and it mixes with other culture, and sometimes it is dead and sometimes it is alive. So how to deal with that? That is one important thing. And another most important thing came at the last stage of the discussion, that no one should be ashamed of their own culture. Whatever it is, language, dialect, foods, they should be proud of them. But it is not the case. In practicality, sometimes people make fun of others' culture and child feel ashamed. So there is a question that how to avoid that. One thing is that family can support, but from outside, how they can survive, that is a question.
And then actually the discussion that we left, we didn't discuss, was the role of the museums for supporting the communities in keeping their cultures alive. We left it out because all the museum workers are attending another seminar today, but would be important. But still, we know that there is a role.
Yes, that I have said that about the integration, what our previous speaker have told, that I think integration is two-way process. Both the sourcing country and receiving country, if they know each other, traditions, culture, more they know, less will be the reluctance to accept it. And in that case, museum can play a role. They can organize event there, both the communities can interact and know each other. And thus, both the integration and keeping the cultural tradition is possible in that way.
Is it okay if I speak from here? I hope the speaker doesn't start to make noise. Okay, so we had the subject of arts and heritage, and I think most of all our discussions reflected how complex of a subject arts and labeling and cataloging art is. I think one of the most frequent words we used was problematic. So, well, we started off with thinking of culture and arts in relation to migration as exported and imported. So there's a transition over geography, and there's a transition over time, generations. So, for example, we came back to Jamil's work, being over here perceived as traditionally Iranian, but over there it's very different from what is traditionally theirs. So there's that transition that when it moves to a different place, the function changes, and also the function of safekeeping and safeguarding also changes, that we try to preserve it, to preserve something that is so-called original, or are we preserving it to make sure that that we say the original, and also to preserve something new that is formed, which over generations will happen in any case. So living heritage in that sense is complex because it cannot be locked in time, because every generation will have their own version. And we spoke of representation, especially within decision making and policy makers. That over here we had a very wide array of representation, different backgrounds, different art fields. But where does it stop? How far does it need to go? Where do we have to have that integration of different representation of people who decide? So who in UNESCO is deciding on what is relevant and what is not? Are they familiar with each art form? Are they familiar with each culture? And that we found to be very important, especially with the fact that labels limit art. And to put art in a box is a conundrum in itself, because art's purpose is to get out of boxes. But to make a catalog, especially from a Western point of view, and a very Eurocentric point of view, everything else becomes exotic. And cataloging often is very exotifying, and we're talking about normativity, what is so-called normal art, what doesn't need to be cataloged because it's always there, and what needs to be cataloged because it's the other. So that was a big question. We didn't really have any definitive answers to how that can be solved, but it's definitely something that needs to be considered, especially from that point of view that some art is worth more than others in that sense. Yes, and then we came to the question of relevance. That, well, to be very blunt, who cares about a list? And that's a real question. Who cares? And why should someone care? So if I, as a second generation Ghanaian who lives in Finland, decide that, okay, the version of my Ghanaian dance is relevant, it should be there. Or as a second generation Swedish Finn, decide that, yes, my version of our traditions is important, it should be on that list. But why should I care? What work can we do as an institution to make it relevant for the people who actually live in that culture? The whole list, the whole catalog here is based on the principles of the fact that colonization is the reason why living heritage has been separated, because most art forms and most preserved forms are due to colonialist backgrounds. But the only way to get around that is decolonialization and recentralizing, which means that we making the list, we don't matter. The people who the list is about, they matter. And how can we step aside and give them that space? What are the different ways that we can use to make them more relevant, or make us as representatives of art forms and cultures more relevant, instead of making the list in itself or the catalog in itself the important thing? Did I miss something? Well, that was, in a nutshell, most of our discussion. So it had a lot to do with how can art be cataloged, actually. Yes. Thank you.
We didn't quite choose who would do the concluding remarks, but I got the honor just some 5 minutes back, but I'm happy to do this. Oh, what an interesting today. I'm so happy you all came here today, and I especially want to thank all the partners, Kaisa, for giving the venue and doing this together with us. Kulttuuria kaikille -palvelu, Helina Rautavaaran museo Interkult, Kulttuuriyhdistelmä Interkult. Thank you so much, and for all of you participating as the ones giving the presentations or facilitating the workshop or participating actively to the discussions. I think we've had a very nice day, and I have certainly learned a lot from the program. I think Marian Abdulkarim gave really good comments, critical but yet positive, and in a way that how can we make this tool usable for us, how can we make it better, and what do we need to consider on this. Then we had the example of a more traditional festival of the Durga Puja. Thank you, Somdata, very, very much. And also it was very refreshing to see this example from Jamil, how is heritage used as a means of arts making. And I'm especially thankful for your workshop and all these critical comments that you gave us, and also to the implementation. It is certainly not an easy process that we're dealing with, but I think it's worth it. I think that both the UNESCO convention and the inventorying, not the cataloging, but inventorying, as they should be taken as tools. I mean, it's something that we can use to raise awareness and make visible the traditions, and we need to take into account the diversity and also different views. Just to mention that in the wiki you can have multiple versions of the same thing. For example, Vappu, you can have, I don't know, 3 versions. Karelian pies is so far the only example where there is 2 different versions. So, but that is possible, so no one can own the tradition or say that this is the only truth now. So this goes for the wiki inventory. But I mean, the convention is something, it's an international tool, okay, it's the state who ratified it and so on. But I think it's a good way to make it visible, to have this discussion, and this is the reason why we as partners and you people came here together to discuss this issue, as well as is the inventorying. It's one tool to discuss about this. But what is most important is the work done by all of you, by all of us, in families, to safeguard the traditions, to transmit them, also to renew them, not to freeze them, but to renew them and to use them as we feel is relevant for us today. Is it in the families, in the clubs, in the NGOs, even in the institutions? It is about raising awareness, and I think this is certainly what we have done today, and thank you all for your contribution. I think we've already had 2 really good workshops and seminars, and I hope this is that we can continue the cooperation in a way or another. So thank you very much for you all.